Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today for the first in a series of Western Governors Workforce Development Initiative webinars. Today's webinar will examine strategies to expand youth apprenticeship. I'm Lauren Danino, Policy Advisor at the Western Governors Association. And before I introduce our moderator and panelists, I'd like to describe the initiative and go over a few logistical details for the webinar. The Western Governors Workforce Development Initiative is the major policy effort of current Chair Governor Dennis Daugaard of South Dakota. The initiative is bringing together policymakers, educators, business leaders, and others working in workforce development to bridge the gap between prospective workers and employers in the West. It's also providing a framework for states to share best practices in workforce development. The initiative kicked off this fall with a series of 4 workshops held in South Dakota, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Washington. The workshops highlighted a variety of youth apprenticeship programs across the West. Today's webinar will take a deeper look at how those programs are established and scaled. We have an excellent panel today to share their experiences with youth apprenticeship, and will be led by our moderator, Brent Parton. Brent is the Deputy Director of the Center on Education and Skills with the Education Policy Program at New America, a nonpartisan think tank based in Washington, D.C. His work focuses on federal and state policies to scale learning-based pathways to economic opportunity that can begin inside or outside of formal higher education. Prior to New America, Brent served as a senior policy advisor at the U.S. Department of Labor, and before that led apprenticeship and other skills-focused initiatives at the National Governors Association, as well as the World Bank. Brent is joined by our panelists, Chris Nesmith, who is the Career and Technology Education Director in West Valley, Yakima, Washington. Chris was a student intern himself as a high school student for St. Gobain growing sapphire wafers, and he was a high school business education teacher prior to joining West Valley. Mark Tapy is the Program Manager of the High School Youth Apprenticeship Program at Pinnacol Assurance here in Denver, Colorado. Since he was hired in January of 2017, he has collaborated with local schools in CareerWise, Colorado to launch the largest high school apprenticeship site in the state. Prior to his work at Pinnacol, Mark has spent 10 years in his career focusing on youth workforce development initiatives, and where he helped develop, manage, and launch multiple programs in 6 major school districts in the Denver metro area. And finally, Diane Jones is a Senior Policy Advisor to the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Labor, where she provides oversight and policy guidance on efforts to expand apprenticeship. Diane spent most of her career in higher education, including as a biology professor at a community college, where she started a biotechnology technician training program. 10 years ago, she turned to apprenticeship as an underutilized solution for education and training. And Diane served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary for Post-Secondary Education at the Department of Education during the George W. Bush administration. She comes from a family of apprentices and completed a youth apprenticeship while in high school. Carrying on the tradition, her son completed an apprenticeship in the marine trades 7 years ago. I'll now go over a few logistics for our participants. Each panelist will deliver opening remarks, and following those remarks, Brent will start a moderated discussion. After the moderated discussion, we'll open it up to question and answer from our participants. So to explain how that works, we have Kevin Moss.
Hi everyone, this is Kevin Moss with WGA. If you look at the panelist list on the WebEx platform, you'll see my name up there. And then above that on the right-hand tab, you'll also see a chat function. So at any point during the webinar, if you think of a question, you can send those questions to me, and then I will pass them over to our moderator, and he'll parse through the best ones and create a lively discussion for us. So feel free to send in multiple questions and send them in at any time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And we encourage you all to submit questions. We're hoping to have a really lively discussion and cover all of the questions that you may have. Also, please note a recording of the webinar will be available, and we'll be sending that around to everyone that participated early next week. And with that, I will hand things over to our moderator, Brent.
Thank you, Lauren. It's really a pleasure to be with you all today, and thank you to the Western Governors Association for bringing this discussion together. It's my job to really try and tee us up here, and as Lauren detailed, it's my understanding that many of you out there are up to speed on how youth apprenticeship generally works, what programs look like, what types of players are involved, and today's discussion is really an opportunity to start to advance that thinking, particularly around this question of scale. How do we meaningfully expand high-quality youth apprenticeship in the United States? How do you leverage policy to do that? How do you find clear strategies to work across industries, across an entire region, and not just do programs from one employer to the next employer? We really have a great group here to discuss all of these issues with us, and they can lend a range of expertise from all of those important perspectives, from policy to education to, of course, the utmost importance, industry. So it's my job to try and tee us up. So it's worth giving a quick word on who I am. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Brent Parton. I work with New America. We are a nonpartisan think tank headquartered in Washington, D.C. Where I sit is called the Center on Education and Skills, and we really focus on strengthening the linkages between learning and work, between schools and the local economies. Naturally, apprenticeship is one strategy that we've been doing a lot of work in because of its unique attributes to accomplish those same goals that we're interested in. Most recently, last year, we put on a major conference in partnership with other national partners called the Apprenticeship Forward Conference. But also more recently, we've been conducting work over the course of 2017 on youth apprenticeship in particular. As all of us on this webinar can attest to, the fact that we're here shows that there's a lot of interest in youth apprenticeship today. We hear about programs, we might go to see them, we see things that have been around for a decade, we see exciting new startups underway. Most importantly, too, we see the European systems. We see Germany and Switzerland, also places like the UK and also Australia, where apprenticeship has achieved some level of scale that we have yet to realize here in the United States. Compared to our international counterparts, you look at apprenticeship in the United States, and our apprentices are comparatively old. The average age of an apprentice in the United States is closer to 30 than it is 18, and most of our apprenticeship programs remain to this day concentrated in a limited range of occupations or industry sectors. Against that backdrop, we can't meaningfully expand apprenticeship in the United States without trying to connect it and integrate it more directly and into our formal education systems, and importantly, expand apprenticeship into new industry sectors. Youth apprenticeship seeks to achieve both those ends. So that's why over the course of 2017, we led a year-long research project where we took a deep dive into what youth apprenticeship looks like in the United States. The culmination was our first report that we released back in December called Youth Apprenticeship in America Today. And we tried to address some of the big questions that surfaced about why is it so hard, or what are the big opportunities for expanding youth apprenticeship in the United States. Here on the slide, you'll see our report is broken out by 5 big picture findings, and we detailed interesting insights along these fronts. I won't go into all these in detail because I don't want to disincentivize you from a thrilling read, but what I will say is highlight just a few to help, again, tee up our conversation today with our panel. First off, there's an idea that youth apprenticeship is some sort of radical idea in the United States, or that it just will never work here, or it's against our culture. And through our analysis, we really looked at deep trends in secondary and post-secondary education, and importantly, amongst our employers as well, and what's going on in our economy. And what we found is that youth apprenticeship is actually aligned. It's a mainstream idea. In fact, it builds on a lot of work that folks on the line are probably already familiar with in terms of work-based learning, expanding dual enrollment programs and career and technical pathways, enhancing the attainment of industry-recognized credentials by students even before they graduate high school. These are all mainstream ideas that are really being driven by some of the major legislative developments at the federal level, particularly around ESSA and career readiness. But it's also something that if we look into our workforce and we look at the demographic change, if we look at the need for more diversity, industry itself is coming to the table in new ways, and there's new exciting research that suggests they have new incentives to participate. So with that in mind, we find that youth apprenticeship is something that is in the mainstream dialogue, and there's a big opportunity here. Of course, that doesn't matter if people don't want it. And there is another idea that youth apprenticeship in the United States would confront this barrier that Americans see apprenticeship as something less than something else. To try to get at if that bias was true, we did some national polling. And what you see here is what we found generally the public. This is a nationally representative poll that we conducted via telephone with a firm. And we found that people generally hold the idea of apprenticeship and its promise to connect people to careers on par with public four-year colleges as well as community colleges. Of course, specifics matter. So what we also did is a set of focus groups. And of course, we wanted the views of employers and school administrators, but we did these focus groups in particular with students and parents. And to answer this question that if we were to meaningfully scale youth apprenticeship in the United States, would they come? And more importantly, what would they want out of it? So these focus groups explored a range of questions the report gets into, but one thing I want to highlight is very important. The overall finding is that the public is generally open to the idea of connecting high school students to apprenticeship with caveats. And those caveats is that these opportunities are seen to broaden options and not narrow them. And critical to making that work is that these programs are offering real transferable college credit that allows students to build upon their experience over time. So the bottom line here is for American Youth Apprenticeship to work, it will need to balance being a distinct post-secondary option, one that helps people connect with opportunities in the labor market and build credentials and work experience they know are in demand, but without looking like an alternative, meaning that it doesn't close off pathways to future advancement that go through more traditional higher education. And that's something that came across very strong. So to kind of bring my pieces home here, I just want to say a few words around what we looked at in the field of youth apprenticeship as a whole, because we tried to understand what's out there, how is it working, and how is it scaling. The first problem, of course, we encountered is there is no single definition of youth apprenticeship in the United States. So we had to somewhat engineer one based on what does exist in terms of definitions for registered apprenticeship, as well as state codified programs for youth apprenticeship. What we found is that there's 4 key elements, or what we would call 4 corners of those programs that need to be upheld, and that the employer is intimately involved in all 4. This is what sets youth apprenticeship apart from other similar, albeit valuable types of work-based learning or work and learn models. So with the definition in mind, then we tried to see, well, who's involved in making this work? And our study details how youth apprenticeship is at its core a partnership. You have employers working with education partners. You have high schools enabling learning on the job and in post-secondary settings. You have post-secondary institutions that really prove to be key in making these programs work. They're the ones that really, in many respects, are well-positioned to ensure these pathways articulate over time and that the curricula is customized enough for industry. And then finally, there's some type of intermediary in the middle that holds all this work together. With that definition and with that idea of partnership, we did a scan across the country, and we found 14 states where there's youth apprenticeship partnership activity happening at some scale. Like planets, if you look at something from afar, they all might look similar. You get a little closer and what you see is a much more diverse landscape. We identified 5 different types of programs, a rough typology of youth apprenticeship in the United States, if you will. We found, of course, that while youth apprenticeship participation is small, it's also incredibly diverse around key areas such as credentials earned, quality assurance mechanisms, as well as the industries and the way that partners come together. Despite that diversity, we were able to uncover really 3 what we call key strategies for scale. If you're a state looking to expand youth apprenticeship opportunities, you have 3 models you could draw from. So in our report, we profile how those strategies work. In Wisconsin, it's a state-run program codified at the state level that's been going on for almost 20 years. Georgia has a very similar program that's been running since then. And this idea of investing in state infrastructure. In North Carolina, you see much more of a bottom-up approach, where the state is playing a supportive role of regional intermediary partnerships that are starting to achieve scale across the state. And in Colorado, which is the most recent iteration, you're seeing a really innovative approach to build a statewide public-private partnership that brokers local partnerships between employers and schools at the local level. Even across all these diverse strategies, we believe that there are things they share, and we hope to explore all of these with our panel today. We think that to make youth apprenticeship work at scale, there has to be attention to a clear framework to guide quality, consistency, and scale. Otherwise, it's hard for all partners to know what their role is. We also think it's important that policy and systems change, there be mechanisms to drive it on the ground. Whether those are changes in policy or in incentives, you need to have systems change at the regional level to make youth apprenticeship work. That includes industry-wide approaches to programs and also sustainable financing for the classroom instruction. Finally, there's the employer incentives. How do you get employers at the table? Of course, we always hear a lot about tax credits, but what we found from research is that's not really an important lever when it comes to youth apprenticeship. It's actually how we fund the classroom instruction that students need, as well as a sustainable model for financing the intermediary. And that's really the biggest design lift for state leaders. How do they want to create the capacity to make youth apprenticeship work? So I'm going to stop talking now and want to hand over, but I just want to offer up food for thought. I think that when we think about state strategies, students and parents or employers are smart. State leaders have to listen to them to know which directions to go in. State leaders also have to be very clear about what their goals are for youth apprenticeship. If we look across the different state systems, those goals vary a little bit. So start with the end in mind and design back from there. And finally, assess and build on what's working. In every state, there are examples of youth apprenticeship programs. Learn from them and figure out what they need to scale. So, you've heard from me, and now what I want to hear is from our panel. And I want them to talk and dig deep into their perspectives on why this work is important, and I hopefully tee up a broader discussion. So at this point, I want to go ahead and introduce Christopher. Christopher joins us all the way from the West Coast in Yakima, Washington, and he's going to talk about what this looks like from the education perspective. Handing over to you, Chris.
All right, thank you, Brent. My name's Chris Nesmith. I'm the Career and Technical Education Director out here in West Valley, Yakima. And I guess I have the pleasure right now is one of the things we've done is we're unveiling our West Valley Futures right now is really how we're rebranding our Career and Technical Education department here. And I've got the privilege of being just a boots-on-the-ground person. I mean, right now I'm sitting in my office at a junior high school surrounded by a bunch of 12 to 14-year-olds and how we've, really look at this from a local level. And I'm really going to come at this from a local level perspective. So we're going to talk about our West Valley program and our West Valley Registered Apprenticeship Manufacturing Program. And I'm going to really highlight the first program. So just talking about our West Valley Futures program, we have 4 key goals on how we prioritize anything here in West Valley. This is approved by our advisory program. We have an advisory in partnership between business partners and community members and educational teachers, and no decision, no budget, nothing goes. We prioritize priority budget, and it's based off these 4 indicators. So all programs of study or sequence of courses, rigorous instruction. We are leading to an industry-recognized certification or college credit. We're leading to a workforce apprenticeship or post-secondary education, and then we added in 2016 that all programs have some form of worksite learning opportunity through internship or apprenticeship. Looking at the West Valley West Valley history, we've had quite a bit of recognition. West Valley is a 2013 STEM Lighthouse School AP College World District, District Administration Magazine District of Distinction in 2016 for Career and College Readiness, and International Center for Leadership and Education. We were an innovative district last year. And recently our Digital Promise League School. So so a lot of our work is not going without recognition. It's been being seen. So talking about West Valley Futures, we run 10 programs of study, and then the 3 in red are really the 3 that we feel that are meeting those 4 goals the best. And that's our manufacturing, firefighting, and early childhood education. And our firefighting and early childhood education end with a internship, not apprenticeship. Where students are, paid internship, but where students are working in early learning facilities. They get 15 credits, and they'll actually finish with their first ECE stackable certification, which can lead to an early childhood or a K-8 teaching degree. And firefighting, the students can earn a 17 credit. They get their National Firefighter certification, and that's applicable to an Associates of Science and Fire Science. But our manufacturing is really what we're going to highlight today. And across the board, actually, we land on those industry-recognized certifications. So some background on my end. I've got the opportunity to go to Europe twice, actually, and look at the different European models. ZFA, International Center for Schools Abroad, we went to Germany for 2 weeks and studied the German dual vocational education system, 1 week urban in Berlin and 1 week rural in Erfurt. And then in July of 2017, this last year, we were at the CMETS in Zurich, Switzerland at ETH Zurich, where they really focus on the economics of education, and really both the German system was the German tour was really a practical application. This is how it works, and our Swiss tour was really this is the research behind what we learned. So that's just some of the background on how we've been looking at those 4 goals and how we can apply it back in West Valley. So looking at our manufacturing program, we begin in the 7th grade with lean manufacturing, AutoCAD, additive and subtractive CNC. We move into our 8th grade science with a material science, 10th grade with welding, where our students get a AWS Sense program, level 1 and level 2. Our teacher is a American Welding Society certified welding educator and certified welding inspector. And then in 11th grade, we move into our Boeing partnership, where we teach 540 hours of manufacturing curriculum in our machine shop in aerospace assembly, culminating in the 12th grade with our AJAC, Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship, Registered Apprenticeship, where students can finish with a journeyman card. I think one of the things that we're most proud of is our junior high robust programming. And we have a Boeing Core Plus advanced manufacturing program. And if you're interested, Boeing does have that curriculum. It's in the public domain. Anybody can access that curriculum for free. And it's up to 1,080 hours, and they just expanded into maritime. In lean manufacturing, we have 300 students, 7th and 8th grade, go through 180 hours of AutoCAD, subtractive CNC programming, and then we have 400 students go through 90 hours of material science. And we're a pretty small district, so we have about 400 per grade level, so that's all 8th graders get material science. In our high school, leading through our 540 hours of manufacturing and our certified welding program, the way our apprenticeship works is we cover the related supplemental instruction from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Monday, and then the students will attend their regular coursework from 11:30 to 2:30 Monday through Friday. And then that means from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. Tuesday through Friday, our students are at their manufacturing sites. And right now we have 3 aerospace partnerships, Triumph Actuation Systems, Cub Crafters, and Pexco Aerospace. And we're looking to expand beyond just aerospace to all advanced manufacturing within our community. Students in our program, it is a registered apprenticeship tied through Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship Committee, and that means our competencies that the students learn are on file with the Department of Labor and Industries, and they'll have 2,000 hours of on-the-job training. Then we crosswalk to those competencies with Common Core credit and a next-gen science credit. So students are getting math, science, and English while they're in their apprenticeships. So the only classes students are required to take when they come back to the school is going to be that last senior year social studies class. Also, while they're in it, they get Precision Machining 1, Precision Machining 2, and Engineering Drawings, where students will be earning 15 college credits in their apprenticeship. West Valley teachers, now the way we do this is we just really focus on our teacher training. Our teacher is an AJAC certified educator. Our teacher is an OSHA 10 certified instructor, but they're also a Washington State certified teacher in manufacturing and work-based learning. And then we have our frameworks that are all approved with that instructional worksite learning piece. One important thing is one of the questions that comes up is funding. And Washington State has a funding mechanism for either what's called cooperative work-based learning or instructional worksite learning. And because we have a mapped out competency of what the students do on their OJT, their on-the-job training, we receive a one-to-one funding on their time at the job site back in our FTE allocation. So that means 1 hour of work is worth 1 hour of class time in the eyes of the state. So even though the students are at work, we're still counting those students in our full-time enrollment allocation because we have a way to track the competencies being done. And that's one of the benefits of how we use the registered apprenticeship model that we have with AJAC and how we track those competencies. Again, now, a long link, but those competencies that we align to are on file with the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries. So really, it's just crosswalking those competencies back and forth between how our Washington State Department of Labor and Industries tracks competencies versus how our Washington State education system tracks competencies. And really it's the same system, but the documentation looks different. So it's just making sure that we have it documented in the way that our Office of Education is used to looking at those documents compared to how our Department of Labor is used to looking at those documents. With our registered apprenticeship, because we are in partnership with our Department of Labor, it also maps out the competencies and the skills and the safety protocols, and because we have 540 hours of training before we place our students, it also enables our manufacturing businesses to get those minor work permits, which map out those pre-apprenticeship models, so that way our 16 and 17-year-olds are running industrial equipment. They're running the industrial lathes, they're running the industrial mills, but because we have a safety checklist that we went through with those students, also including that OSHA 10 certification that we have all of our shop students receive. So when we talk about expanding, one of the things I like to say about West Valley is we are the least innovative school district in the United States. We have not invented anything new, and I think one of the conversations that come up is from Brent was, how do we have a funding mechanism? And when we go back to our 4 goals is we map that industry recognized certifications and those college credits back to Carl Perkins reauthorization. That's a requirement under Carl Perkins, and with that reauthorization coming back up in the next month or to. We really just prioritize that Carl Perkins grant requirement. It's also how we were able to do that college credit piece. Since community colleges have that requirement to have a scope and a pathway between community colleges and back down to high schools, we use that Carl Perkins requirement, and that's how we have that 15 college credit. One of the things that in 2011, Carl Perkins pulled out the tech prep, pulled out paying for the tech prep, but one of the biggest things that would help us expand is getting that tech prep college credit back within that Carl Perkins reauthorization, which just leverages an older funding model. We use the apprenticeship system that already exists. Our AJAX program and the competency programs and the filing with L&I has already existed. So we just found a way to make sure that our the documentation requirements are predominantly the same. We just had to map it out and make sure we use the same paperwork. And just leveraging the worksite learning funding models and how we collect that one-to-one. And then beyond that, it's just leveraging and working with our community partners. We did hand over a lot of our administration placement for business onboarding with our Economic Development Council and our workforce development. And I think that just the last thing is we just prioritize student learning above all else. And that's really what kind of gets me to that permeability piece and what is the biggest barrier, and I think Brent really hit on it. And unaware that there's American research, I did cite a Swiss research on the topic. And one of the things we found when we were in Switzerland and Germany is the biggest barrier to growing apprenticeship is if we have to pigeonhole students into being able to access university. And if we tell our students they can't go to university with apprenticeship models, that'll really hinder the growth. And there's a access point, and I'll just kind of close on some of our examples that we have to that permeability. The Washington State University admittance requirements, you'll notice applied English is not allowed. For arts programs, you can't use CTE technical skills. And students who really get into these technical classes really creates a barrier for their access to university. And if we're really going to grow apprenticeship models within the United States, we have to set it up in a way where it opens doors and it doesn't close doors. And another example is going to be the NCAA requirements. One of our students was a top-rated quarterback, but then had to make a decision on if he was going to move forward with our programs because classes that utilize vocations and welding would have eliminated his opportunity to move forward. Again, my name is Chris Nesmith. You can follow us in West Valley on my Twitter, Nesmith at NesmithEDU, and also our West Valley Futures, which is a new launch. But at this point, I think I can hand it over to Mark Tapy.
Yeah, this is Mark. And yeah, thank you very much for the handoff there. It's really exciting to hear what you all are doing in the district there. I think, we have some similar programming going on here in Colorado, and specifically with our Denver Public School District that I'm hoping to highlight a little bit here. Again, my hope is that I can also be sort of a boots on the ground perspective from a business standpoint. I'm currently looking out of my office at two of our apprentices from our technology pathway who are serving help desk tickets right now. So very much on the ground and very excited about the opportunity that we've had so far this year with our program model. Just a little bit of background. I am the program manager here at Pinnacol Assurance. About our company, we are the largest provider of workers' compensation insurance in the state of Colorado. We currently have 640 employees and insure about 60% of Colorado businesses. In August of 2017, we launched our initial apprenticeship cohort here as a partner of the CareerWise Colorado statewide initiative that was mentioned a little bit earlier, and we are currently operating the largest CareerWise apprenticeship program in the state. Before I go into the nuts and bolts of our model, I wanted to start with why we decided to jump into the apprenticeship model the way that we did. And really, the rationale is that our organization is facing a challenge, and that challenge is that we're aging. As you see here, in the next 3 years, 30% of our employees will be over the age of 50 with 10 or more years of experience. And as a result, we know that we're facing a retirement boom, and we will be in desperate need of talent coming up here in the next few years. So we're seeing that at our site, but what's even more challenging is that these are trends that are actually reinforced across our industry at large. Bureau of Labor statistics tell us that nearly 50% of the insurance industry will be nearing retirement in the next decade, which means that 500,000 positions are anticipated to open up between 2015 and 2012. That's also compounded by the fact that there's only 14,000 students worldwide that are graduating with undergraduate degrees in risk management. And this may not come as a shock to everyone, only 5% of high school students consider themselves very interested in a career in insurance. So we as a company know that we have to launch some innovative and non-traditional solutions to help find and develop talent and sustain our operations. Fortunately for us, as we are evaluating this talent acquisition challenge, our state has been launching an initiative called CareerWise Colorado. And CareerWise Colorado, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a nonprofit intermediary which is actively connecting the K-12 education system, business partners, and training centers to develop youth apprenticeship programming in targeted industries such as finance and insurance services, healthcare, business operations, information technology, and advanced manufacturing. They're currently supporting nearly 50 businesses launch multi-year youth apprenticeships around the state, and they're borrowing elements from the Swiss system, which is widely regarded as the gold standard in apprenticeship. Really, the aim of CareerWise is to ensure benefit for both students and businesses and to serve as that liaison between what we all know are the complex systems of both education and industry. As far as the launch goes, CareerWise was actually envisioned by its founder and CEO, Noel Ginsberg, as well as our Colorado State Governor, John Hickenlooper, in response to challenges within our state's talent pipeline. And following a 2015 trip to Switzerland that they went on to learn about the youth apprenticeship model there. In 2016, the organization was created as a public-private partnership. Our CEO is actually a board member of CareerWise Colorado, and then, as I mentioned earlier, the summer of 2017, the first cohorts were launched. Really, the goal overall of CareerWise Colorado is to facilitate the development of a statewide apprenticeship ecosystem that will help produce 20,000 youth apprentices over the course of the next 10 years. It's worth noting that they are also, to some of Chris's points, our primary support with regard to competency alignment with the school districts, to developing training plans, and they're also helping us register our model with the Department of Labor. Again, just our process. In 2015, our executive team began supporting innovative workforce development initiatives that might target our talent development and acquisition challenges. In 2016, our CEO, Phil Kalin, along with Governor Hickenlooper, went to Switzerland as a member of a statewide delegation of stakeholders interested in the apprenticeship model and committed Pinnacol to participate in the program. I was actually brought on board in January of 2017, so just over a year ago, and began the design and launch of the program. And then again in August of 2017, we launched with our initial cohort. So general overview of our model, we currently have 21 apprentices from 4 local high schools. We have 2.5 fully dedicated staff. All of our apprentices are either juniors or seniors in high school, and they're concurrently enrolled in both high school coursework as well as post-secondary dual enrollment, which is targeted either towards an associate's degree in business or a bachelor's degree in computer science, depending on which pathway they're enrolled in, both within the school district and within our site. Our program is a 3-year model with a progressive wage scale. So in the first year, our apprentices are earning minimum wage. They're here 2 days a week, and we're really focusing primarily on training. We're giving them industry training. We're focusing on professional skills training, and really the key competencies that they need to be successful, both as a professional and just understand the industry that they're operating in. Our apprentices are also supporting a variety of different teams around the building through OJT and directed work experience, and that takes up about 50% of their time on site each week. In the second year of the program, our aim is to increase the time on site from 2 to 3 days a week, and we'll begin to place the apprentices more directly into our pathway tracks that lead to positions that are in line with our primary hiring pain points. This pathway placement will feature increased OJT closer to 75% and will be supplemented with site-based training related directly to those pathways. Then in our third year, our apprentices will be graduated from high school and fully enrolled in post-secondary coursework and will be on site for 3 or more days a week. The goal here with this group is to have them effectively fully deployed within the pathway teams, and then ultimately our aim is to hire these apprentices at the end of the 3-year program. Just briefly, here is an overview of some of the on-site training that we are working on with our apprentices. As you can see, there is industry knowledge. Much of our industry training is actually rolling up into an insurance credential, which is a property casualty fundamentals certification that's initiated by a credentialing agency in the insurance industry. We also have various professional skills that we feel are foundational for our apprentices to make the leap from being a high school student into, successfully being a professional on site here at Pinnacol. In addition to the training, we've had each of our apprentices shadow over 35 teams around the building with the hope of, to Chris's point earlier, we don't want them to necessarily feel pigeonholed in the pathways that they initially enroll in, but we want them to have exposure to all of the different career opportunities that are available within an insurance company like our own. The first few years of their experience will likely be in these pathways, but it is possible to have a long and diversified career within our company and within our industry. The third kind of key building block of our program right now, again, is the OJT, which our apprentices are not currently supporting the key pathway teams right now. We actually have had them support 21 different teams around the building, which has created more broad-reaching support for our organization. It's actually helped us access some niches of the company that we didn't anticipate being able to benefit from an apprenticeship model, but are finding that in some cases our apprentices are actually performing one semester in at or above the same level as some of our full-time staff, which is incredible. And so once our apprentices have gotten through this first year, really our next steps in the next 2 years are to funnel our apprentices into our key pathway placements, which again are corresponding to our highest area of need. What we've seen with the diverse placements is that we can set up a multi-year 2-tiered system where we can backfill apprentices into our diverse placements as we move our cohort 1 apprentices into our pathway placements. But primarily we're focusing, the bulk of our apprentices are in the business pathway, and they will be funneling into our insurance operations pathways. And then we also have a technology pathway where 5 of our apprentices are, as I mentioned earlier, enrolled in post-secondary credits focused on computer science, and they're getting development, help desk, IT exposure on site here. But like I said, we are finding that there's actually more application for our apprentices around the building than we initially expected, and they're providing a lot more value than we initially expected as well, which is excellent. Just as far as supports for our apprentices, we obviously have our program team, our staff who are fully dedicated. Each of our apprentices are matched with a coach or a mentor that they meet with weekly, that they can both, discuss the organization as well as professional skills, as well as, even issues outside of the apprenticeship. Each apprentice has a work project supervisor, which is overseeing their competency attainment and providing quality assurance on their work on the ground. And then CareerWise provides us with a staff liaison that helps connect us with the school district, and each apprentice has a district staff person that is serving as somewhat of a counselor role for the apprenticeship model. Just very quickly, credentials and benefits for the apprentices, high school diploma for each of our apprentices, post-secondary degree through the district partnership. We are in the process of registering our model with the DOL. As I mentioned earlier, the industry certification. All of our apprentices will leave with 3 years of paid work experience. They're contributing to our state retirement plan as 15 and 16-year-olds. They receive 1 day of PTO per quarter. They're eligible for gain sharing, and they receive 16 paid hours of volunteer annually, which we do as a group. Just looking back at, the value for our company, we're accessing this new talent pipeline. We're increasing our operational bandwidth, and, we're finding a return on investment through both deployment currently as well as, the decrease for long-term hires. There's also a latent function of the leadership opportunity that it's providing within our company for individuals who haven't had leadership experience, but they're able to begin somewhat of a management role as a supervisor with our apprentices. We also have just a general cultural impact around the building. Not only is this in alignment with our corporate citizenship, but there's a certain energy that high school students bring to the building, and there's a certain enthusiasm that they bring to the building that's been, I think, very refreshing for a lot of our staff. So that's the general overview that I have right now. More than happy to discuss any detail, and just really excited to be a part of this initiative that I really believe deeply in.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Hi, this is Diane. I think the controls have been handed over to me for advancing my slides. I'm with the U.S. Department of Labor. I'm Senior Advisor to the Secretary, and probably most importantly to this conversation, I was a youth apprentice, and my son completed an apprenticeship, 7 years ago. So for me, I think that apprenticeship is good public policy, but it's more personal than that for me. I've seen the power of apprenticeship, and I've seen just how incredibly positive the outcomes can be. So for me, yes, it's my job, but it's also my passion. And I think you heard from all the other speakers that it's their passion as well. And one of the wonderful things I love about working in apprenticeship is that you do see this passion. Everywhere I go, every employer I meet with, apprentices themselves, there's an excitement and a passion that is just wonderful to see. So we're working at the federal level to try to expand apprenticeship, and I will say that, the majority of our work in the past has been focused on adult apprenticeship. We're starting to look at youth apprenticeship, but we believe that with youth apprenticeship, the states really need to take the lead because oftentimes it's working with local school districts. So we are supportive of the idea of youth apprenticeship. We want to help. But I would say that most of our activities in the recent 5 years have been focused on adult apprenticeship. I think one of the great things about youth apprenticeship is it changes the conversation about young people. Young people are actually quite remarkable. They're energetic, they're creative, and I think what we find with youth apprenticeship is that when we as the adults find an environment where they can be productive and be empowered, they're incredibly productive. And so I think it's our responsibility as adults to find these environments for our young people so that they can thrive. And apprenticeship has certainly turned out to be one of the great solutions to help young people find their way. Why do we care about apprenticeship here at the federal level or here at the Department of Labor? A couple of reasons. One, we hear the statistic over and over again about 6.1 million jobs that are unfilled. And, there's a skills gap. And I think, we're lucky to be in this place of low unemployment, but from employers' perspective, unemployment is now at the point where they worry about productivity. So we need to fill these jobs, and by the way, there are people who are still looking for work, and we need to make sure they have the skills necessary to get those jobs. So clearly we want to address the skills gap. I think the other reason why at the federal level we see apprenticeship as great public policy is there's not a person alive who isn't concerned about the $1 trillion student loan debt. or the average debt of $26,000. Interestingly, and most people in the U.S. don't realize it, the average debt load among college students in the UK is higher than in the U.S., and so that's a fact that most people don't know. But so just when we think we're the worst, it turns out in the UK their per student debt load is even higher. But that doesn't make it okay here. So I think looking to apprenticeship as one of the ways to reduce reliance on debt and to help students find a way forward without feeling the obligation to take on, significant student loan debt. So these are, critically important public policy issues, and we all see the statistics from employer surveys that, they see in the coming near future, one of their greatest challenges is going to be to fill vacancies for skilled workers. Apprenticeship in the U.S. Has continued to grow. There's been a concerted effort since 2014 to grow apprenticeship, and we're a little over 500,000 at this point. I will say, though, that many times when you see international comparisons, I don't think that it is an accurate comparison, because in the U.S., we know that outside of the Registered Apprenticeship Program, there are all kinds of programs that exist that are high quality. We just haven't bothered to count them. And so I think we're trying to launch a new effort to discover these programs, to count them, to look at them. We believe there are many more than 533,000 apprenticeships in the U.S. right now. It's just that we only count registered programs. So we may find that when we get an accurate count, we're probably not going to be at the same level as the Germans, but we may be, better than we think we are. And, what's interesting is at a time that we're looking at apprenticeship as a way to, sort of move back from a prior policy position that said everybody should go to college, in Germany, a third of their apprenticeships go unfilled. Because in Germany, even though the culture of Germany has been reliant on apprenticeship, and my grandfather did an apprenticeship in Germany, they're now trending toward college. And so 30% of the apprenticeship slots went unfilled in Germany in, I think it was 2015 or 2016. And in Eastern Germany, almost half went unfilled. So even in countries that have done a great job and have been apprenticeship reliant, they're starting to see trends that favor college, and their spots are going unfilled. So, it's kind of interesting how we each learn from each other, but, college, I think, has gained popularity, for many good reasons, but I think we see an increase in parents seeing college as the only way forward. It's interesting, Brent survey data, it's interesting, and I'm actually thrilled to see that there was such positive response about the power and potential of apprenticeship. I wonder, though, and I need to look at the report because maybe you asked this question, there's a difference between saying, do you think this is a good idea versus would you let your kid do it? And, I say that only because I have a kid who did it. And 7 years ago, well, actually 9 years ago when my son started his apprenticeship, there were people who, and by the way, I was the assistant secretary for post-secondary ed at the time, so people thought my job was to tell everybody to go to college, even though that wasn't really the message that I delivered. But so here I was, sitting in this place trying to help more people go to college, and my own kid decided after 1 year of college that he hated it and wanted to do an apprenticeship. And there were a lot of people in my social network who acted as though I had just told them that my kid, was dying of some horrible disease, and I'd have to remind them that this was actually something that we were really happy about and we were really pleased. And by the way, by doing 1 year of college instead of 4, we saved ourselves $150,000. So, but I still think that, parents in general are starting to see this as a positive policy change. But I think we have some distance to travel in finding parents who are willing to say, and yes, I want this for my child. So I think we're moving in that direction, but we have some work to do. As was mentioned earlier, the U.S. Registered Apprenticeship System was set up by and for the construction trade. And so it's not shocking that the majority of our registered apprenticeships are in the building trades, and the program has served them well. What we've seen is that the growth into other industries has been slower than we would like, and I'll talk in a minute about a parallel apprenticeship system that we're trying to stand up. But even within the registered program, there's been an effort over the past several years to branch into new industries. And you can see from the slide, we have large companies that really see this as not just their, corporate community contribution, but, they're investing because they see that this is critical to their own success as a business. So, this isn't all about being good and wonderful and serving your community. I mean, I think business leaders are realizing that this serves them well as well, and that's a positive thing because for apprenticeship to be sustained, businesses really have to see the payoff. And so far, what we hear from businesses is that they see the payoff in ways that they expected, and then they also see it in ways that they didn't even expect it when they got started. As you've heard, at the core of apprenticeship is a job. And I think one of the things that's wonderful about apprenticeship is, I think when students are entering college, they're always a little bit nervous, so what am I going to do with this degree? And is there going to be a job for me at the end of this rainbow? And the wonderful thing about apprenticeship is that, they have a job from the beginning. Now, I understand in youth apprenticeship, that model might be slightly different. And they may not have a full-time job, it may be part-time, but they have a job. And there's a certain amount of just positive identity that comes from having a job. And so not only do we think having a job is an important component of the structural and instructional focus of apprenticeship, we think it's very empowering for people to have a job. So that's critical to apprenticeship. I think one of the places where all institutions, both K through 12 schools and institutions of higher education have struggled is that, this is a kind of learning that industry must lead. And so I think that both industry and education partners need to learn better how to work with each other. I think in the past there's been a lot of finger pointing, they did this, they didn't do this. And I think what we're seeing through apprenticeship is that these groups are learning how to come together and share information. And I think that what industry brings to the table is being respected in a way that maybe it hadn't been in the past. So, and it basically also says to industry, quit your complaining. You think we're doing such a bad job, we'll step up to the plate and help. So I think for many, many reasons, it's great that educators and industry leaders come together to solve this problem together. And then, of course, there's a really important instructional component, which you've heard about. As was mentioned earlier, there was an executive order introduced by President Trump back in June of 2017 to expand apprenticeship. And one of the things included in that executive order was a call to bring together a task force on apprenticeship expansion. We are very lucky that Governor Daugaard is on this task force, and he brings a wealth of energy and experience and interest to the task force. But this group of experts was brought together to advise the government on a couple of things. One, what can the federal government do or do better to promote apprenticeship? What can industry do, and how can government incentivize industry to do it, to expand apprenticeship? But also, how could we stand up this parallel system of apprenticeships that really focus on careers outside of the building trades, and that instead of taking a company-by-company approach to apprenticeship, really take a sector-based approach to apprenticeship. And so we're working with our task force to figure out how to create this program. And it will be separate and distinct from the registered program. And I say that because I think some may have misunderstood the executive order to think that this new program would replace registered, and that is not at all what the executive order calls for, and it's not what we want. We think that's a great and robust system. But for companies that have said the structure of registered doesn't quite fit for their industry, we want to enable and encourage them to come up with a system that does work for their industry. Interestingly, as the task force has come together and they're working on a set of recommendations, I would say at the top of the list of things we hear from task force members is that we must address this issue of stigmatization, that if we can't do better at helping people understand the power of apprenticeship and the great jobs that are available for people who come through an apprenticeship pathway, almost nothing that business or government can do will have the success we want. So I think working together, we all have to address this issue of negative stigmatization. And you know, there are all kinds of historical reasons why we landed where we did. But I also think, as was mentioned earlier, one of the great benefits of the new focus on apprenticeship is it is no longer being presented as an either-or option, meaning vocational or college. We're seeing that apprenticeship is woven into high school, into community college, into four-year institutions. And those partnerships are important not just to improve the quality of apprenticeship, but to also push back against some of these negative stigmas. So when we look at future opportunities, I mean, certainly the federal government is interested, you know, through our task force, trying to see what we can do to create incentives and reduce barriers to entry. This is one issue that has incredibly positive bipartisan support. It's really fun to work on an issue that on Capitol Hill everybody loves, and so we're really fortunate, and that makes it a really wonderful topic and issue to work on. We know that we have to put employers in the driver's seat. We know that the federal government can and must do more on the marketing front. You know, we have the bully pulpit, we have the platform, and we were quite successful in communicating the message that everybody should go to college. We need to be equally as successful in communicating that there are other options and that they are not mutually exclusive of a future that includes college credits or a college degree. And then clearly state efforts are so critical, especially in youth apprenticeship. You know, this is going to happen at the state and local level. And so we're really excited when we see states that have jumped in and come up with these innovative models. And, you know, as people have said, you know, states are the laboratory of democracy, and here we see an apprenticeship that this is holding true. So we congratulate all of you out there who are doing great work, and certainly encourage those of you who are thinking about it or who are on the fence to move forward. And anything that we can do to be helpful, you know, you should feel free to call upon us. So thanks so much, and I will hand it back to Lauren. Or Brent. Who am I handing it back to? Brent, I guess I'm handing it back to you.
This is Lauren. Brent, we aren't getting any sound from you, so if you've got yourself on mute, you may want to undo that.
Can you hear me right now?
Yep, there you are. Thank you.
Right. The green icon did not migrate up to my name, but you can hear me, and that's great. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Diane, for handing it back. As you can see, there's a wealth of experience as well as information that we can draw upon here, and thankfully your questions are already pouring in. So what I'd like to do at this point is move this over into a moderated discussion, and I'm going to go ahead and mix in some of my own follow-up questions alongside yours from the audience. So please keep them coming in. To kick off here, I want to come back to Chris, though. Chris, there's some interest. You explained the program out in Yakima in great detail. Could you spend a couple minutes to tell us a little bit about how the program came together and what was sort of the broader environment in Washington at the time? Were there other pilots underway? What was kind of the step-by-step playbook in terms of what led to your success to go ahead and stand up this program? And what kind of factors do you think, what players were around the table that made standing it up successful?
Well, I mean, I'm going to start off by, sometimes it's just better to be lucky than good. I did my trip to Germany. I came back. We had already been building a set program of study, and that's the reason why you'll see that in that 2016 we adopted with our advisory committee that broader workforce development piece. But we used the Carl Perkins indicators as our drivers when I came in. You know, we wanted to have full programs of study at a minimum of 360 hours. Every program was going to have an industry certification. We were going to launch in the junior high with a strong, all electives in our junior high and all science in our junior high are CTE classes. I didn't touch on our other programs, but we're a Microsoft partner school. Every 7th grader gets their Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint certification, and we're recognized by Microsoft for our success in that. And we're a premier Boeing partner, and we were already training our students with Boeing subject matter experts coming in and testing our students at the end of each year and hiring directly from our students to the Boeing manufacturing plants right out of West Valley High School. So we already had that infrastructure in place. Now, where I say it's better to be lucky than good is I came back from Germany, and I got to say, one of the things I know we call Switzerland the gold standard, but what I liked about the German model is the number of refugees Germany brings in, and the fact that Germany has a comprehensive plan for students with learning disabilities. That was so much more encumbering that was something that really sold me on the German model. And we ran a career and college fair in which we had AJAC represented, and I met Bree Durham, who is probably one of the smartest and most vigilant people I've met with apprenticeship. Got invited to the Governor's Summit on AJAC in November, where they unveiled this plan called, went on Wednesday, called AJAC on Thursday. They were out at our school. AJAC came out to do a presentation about why we should do apprenticeship, but they never gave it. We gave them a presentation about why we should have apprenticeship, and it went from there. And this is where that partnership of having that AJAC Aerospace Apprenticeship Organization, they already had the business contacts, and I had business contacts. And then we had this partnership where we leveraged those. It's amazing. Boeing subject matter experts coming in and testing my kids at the end of the year is phenomenal. But having my kids assessed weekly for their performance at work when they're running end mills and lathes and CNC machines and programming CNCs, and I get feedback by the week on what we did in our RSI and how we can adjust the following week, is beyond expectation. So I'd like to have a greater story on how it all came together, but we just happen to have a very good manufacturing program where this apprenticeship program tapered on really well, and the work of AJAC and the Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship Committee is just, unmatchable.
Thank you. We really appreciate that response. And I think, yes, you were lucky, but we hear a lot of things in that, and we can take a lot away from your presentation, that there had been a lot of systems change work going, focused on career pathways. You built upon the CTE pathways that existed. We heard that from you. We also heard about the state of Washington took an important step demonstrating that state leadership that Diane talked about to support pilot programs across the state as proof of concept. And actually, I believe the governor funded those using some of the state funding. And so having ready and willing partners at the local level to take up that call to action is so important. So we appreciate your context on that. I want to pivot back over to Mark for a second and have him talk a little bit more about the employer side. There's a lot of things companies can do to address the challenges that you laid out at the beginning of your presentation. You talked about, in particular, about your aging workforce. You've talked, a lot of companies are used to recruiting out of colleges. They're used to maybe hosting some internships here and there. Maybe they're even used to going and poaching people from their other competitors. But the point is that youth apprenticeship seems to be a unique level of commitment. It's a new way of kind of rethinking how you're doing your human resources strategy. So could you share for us a little bit, we understand why youth apprenticeship made sense, but why specifically youth apprenticeship? Why this multi-year structured program over, say, all the other possible options that are out there? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think, you raise an excellent question there, and I would be lying to you if I said that we haven't or aren't also considering other options. But I think first and foremost, it's really important to acknowledge the leadership of our company. We have some very strong leaders that have a vision that's not just necessarily for our company, but it's for our state and our state workforce. And what we've seen in our state is that we have just a broken system, a broken pipeline where so many of our youth, I think the statistics are somewhere around, for every 100 high school ninth graders in our state, only about 18% of them are receiving the post-secondary credentialing within 150% of the typical window that is expected, and most of the jobs in our state are requiring post-secondary skills. And so we just know that there's a challenge that's greater than just our company, and there's a challenge that's impacting our entire state. And we feel like if we address this with the youth population, and we can help galvanize and inform other companies, both in our industry and other industries that have need to take on this type of responsibility, it's kind of a rising tide raises all ships phenomenon. And we just see that we think there's the broadest impact. We've mentioned that corporate social responsibility is a secondary factor for businesses, and I would agree that that's definitely the case here. We are looking for return on investment, but we also feel like it's important to invest in the quality and caliber of workforce in our state so that there is more talent out there that can access the type of jobs that go unfilled. So that's, I think, in a lot of ways what our primary consideration was. I think another, just key consideration with the youth population is that we want to maintain some of the institutional knowledge. We would love for these, young students to learn from our leaders now who may not be here down the road. And so we just felt like it was the right approach for our business. But to your point, there are other apprenticeship pathways, other talent acquisition models that we still are considering. But after seeing what's going on in Switzerland, our leadership here thought that this was the best first step for us.
Really appreciate that. And I think it underscores the fact that apprenticeship is, of course, one tool in the broader toolbox that companies can have to engage with schools and connect with younger generations of talent. But hearing you talk, I think, underscores some of its unique value as a highly structured program that can ultimately create, as you've talked about in your initial presentation, actual bottom line benefits for the company, and that that apprentices, unlike other types of work-based learning, to use Diane's word, are employees. They might be part-time, or they might be not working less than 40 hours a week, but they are employees and they're doing real authentic work. And so it's exciting to hear about sort of how, of course, youth apprenticeship is not the only solution, but how it can be a valuable one. Diane, thank you for your remarks. Let me just put it this way. You enticed a lot of really interesting questions from the audience that want to hear a lot more details on what you shared. But one of those I'm going to give you the opportunity with is they asked, could you provide an example of one of the number of federal initiatives that are being proposed to entice business? So you talked a lot about sort of the different challenges at the federal level in terms of the bullpen, as well as some things that are understandably very early stage of the task force. Talk a little bit about some of the specific areas that you see the task force recommending action, or where you see the department already doing the job to help make apprenticeship a more attractive option for employers around the country.
Sure. I mean, I think that there have been several initiatives that have been ongoing for a few years. And so, the Office of Apprenticeship for many, many decades was a tiny office that didn't receive very much funding and, it worked really hard to advance apprenticeship, but, without a budget, essentially. And a few years ago, not only did the President appropriate some money from a discretionary fund, but Congress gave an appropriation to the Department of Labor that they have continued to re-up so that there's actually some funding. And so some of the initiatives that are underway, that are ongoing, so 47 grants went out to American Apprenticeship Initiative grantees, and these were efforts all across the country to figure out how could we start these new apprenticeships in these new fields. And so sort of the let 1,000 flowers bloom model to see what could be possible. And so we've learned a lot in working with those grantees and their business partners, and so that's been really interesting. The states, we had state expansion grants where the states were given I think it was 50 or 50.5 million went out to the states. I think 37 states got grants, and that was to help those states build the infrastructure that would be needed to take programs to scale in their states. And then more recently, there were contracts given to groups that are apprenticeship intermediaries. So we had industry intermediaries and equity intermediaries, and they were deployed out across the country to help businesses get programs started, to help them figure out how to work with their local education institutions, how to work with their workforce board. So those are some ongoing activities, and so they continue to move forward. I think what the task force is looking at are, are there federal, well, first, are there additional programs that we should support? So clearly we're looking at those opportunities. But in addition, we've heard over the years complaints about the registered system, complaints about social network, safety net programs, and sometimes what happens is, you wouldn't be shocked to hear me say this, that sometimes one federal program has rules that sort of make it impossible for another federal program to expand. So that's another thing that we're looking at is, where across the government do we have regulations in one place that are making it nearly impossible for apprenticeship to grow in another? So we're looking at those as well. So, we're fortunate to have funding, and we will continue to announce new funding opportunities, but also looking, doing some housekeeping internally to figure out, where do we contradict ourselves, or, where do we push ourselves backwards because we have two agencies that haven't connected in their regulatory framework.
Great, thank you, Diane. And I'm glad it's important to underscore the fact that the steps over recent years to put flexible resources on the ground to support the work, critical work with employers, has been something that Congress has recognized, and additional funding we saw in both of the President's proposed budgets, calling for more funding to support the expansion of apprenticeship, in particular around those infrastructure points that you raised. So we really appreciate that. Chris, I want to come back to you because you mentioned something in your remarks that maybe sounded like it got to a little bit of a nitty-gritty, but actually it seemed like it's really important to understand, particularly around how we think about what are the incentives for local school districts to take on this work. You mentioned the words, I believe, 1 hour of work equals 1 hour of classroom time. And that gets into a whole number of concerns around how do we finance local education, but how those can sometimes, how we calculate formulas, might be barriers towards recognizing the really important learning that students get on the job through an apprenticeship. So could you just talk a little bit about exactly why that's important for your work and how that exactly, just give us a little more background about how that works?
Yeah, I can do that. I think the biggest concern that when you talk about this with school districts and you say we want to send a student to work, 2 days a week or 3 days a week, you're wondering about that FTE allocation. And essentially, if you have a staff of, let's say 30 teachers and you're sending 25% of your students somewhere else, how are you going to ensure those teachers are what are you going to do with your teachers? How are you going to ensure that you're going to be able to maintain a self-supporting program? And I think it says, well, if we're in the interest of kids, it shouldn't matter. But at the end of the day, it's going to matter. What we're able to do is, and sorry for my ignorance on other states, but Washington State has two forms of running what we call work-based learning. We have cooperative work-based learning and instructional work-site learning. Cooperative work-based learning is broad area. Like I said, I have an ag work-based learning opportunity. I have a teacher who's agriculturally certified, broad area. Students can work in various agricultural industries with looser defined competencies, and 2 hours of work is worth 1 hour of state funding. But the teacher has to be certified in work-based learning, which means there's release time for the teacher to go off and check on students and make sure that it's safe, there's competencies being learned. The other way is instructional work-site learning, and that connects a a very defined competencies to that work code, that CIP work code, that federal CIP work code, and then the competencies under that CIP work code. And then with a teacher who has a corresponding teaching certification where they can teach those skills. So in our example, our teacher is certified in machining and advanced manufacturing. Our students are in a machining advanced manufacturing CIP code, and then they're doing those AJAC competencies that are very well defined to those competencies while we're placing those students, and they have a job progression rotation. Well, that means I have 1 hour of funding for 1 hour. 1 hour of funding while those students are at work still calculates back into my funding. So then my teacher's only teaching 1 day a week on those skills, but then the other 4 days a week, it's monitoring that those competencies are actually being happening. That summative and formative assessment, our businesses are formative assessing, but then our teacher is summative assessing. Formative just kind of checking for understanding, but then our teacher is, actually, testing those students and submitting those test scores back to AJAC, who does a moderation and the checks and balances across all of their AJAC teachers across the state where we submit those scores. And then we, again, because we're teaching a college-level class, students are getting college-level credit, we run an advisory with the college teacher, the teacher who teaches the AJAC program at the college, with our local business partners, and then we're meeting back for advisories to do checks and balances to ensure that those competencies are being taught as they're supposed to. So there's a lot of restrictions to get that, but now what we're doing is we're focusing on the learning. And you saw in my PowerPoint where I said we prioritize student learning, not teaching. It doesn't really matter how it's taught. We prioritize what the students learned. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and I appreciate that. I know that sometimes getting into stuff like that is not as sexy as talking about employer engagement strategies, but it's really important information to ensure that school districts are enabled to participate in this work, and state policy clearly can play an important role in enabling that to happen. So we appreciate you going into the deep dive on that. And that last word, let's not forget that. It's not just allowing learning to happen elsewhere. It's how do schools actually count learning that happens elsewhere. And that's something that's revolutionary around not just apprenticeship, but broader competency-based education movements. So we appreciate that. I want to come back to you now, Mark, for another word on the employer side, because this has been a subject that's come up a couple times through our conversation. You mentioned the program, and you've listed out a number of the skills that Pinnacol works with on the job. Apprenticeship in the United States compared to international partners has been very retail, one program, one employer at a time. A lot of employers feel like maybe they're forced to reinvent the wheel when they start with these programs. But before Pinnacol started its program, CareerWise worked with industry-wide development of pathways. They engaged I imagine, industry associations, as well as partners to build a sort of baked pathway that then Pinnacol could pick up and use. Talk a little bit about what's the right balance between the skills that you teach as part of that broader pathway, or how Pinnacol has customized those pathways to make it work for you and the work that you need to get done.
Yeah, and I need to give, first I just want to say to Chris that the things that he's talking about as far as the interaction between the school district and the employers and the infrastructure that they've built makes me drool. I'm so excited about how that works, and I think we're close behind, but we're not there in Colorado. With regard to your question, though, about CareerWise, really helping create and bake those pathways, we were a part of that discussion. I think that's somewhat novel in the fact that we're a part of this initial cohort, but we help design the pathway for other industry organizations by having, staff from CareerWise that come to our business to interview pathway-specific leadership, staff members, to design the competency skills that we feel like for our company are appropriate, that we hope will also help scale to help build infrastructure for other companies. I think just from an industry standpoint, having those maps and those roadmaps established helps with some of the front end just energy opportunity cost that's required to launch an apprenticeship program, especially at the scale that we are on. Because so much of this is so new for us right now, having best practices established in areas that we can start with a baked recipe and then deviate from really help us ensure the quality of our programming, and there are areas that we can ultimately circle back to. But I can't understate the value of CareerWise in that process enough, because they have connected us with these benchmarks and these best practices, as well as the infrastructure for tracking competencies. We're actually using a system called Motivus, where we upload competency attainment that we're seeing on site that CareerWise can then leverage to relay back to school districts. And then, sort of to Chris's point, this allows for competency-based curriculum attainment, and ensuring that students are getting credit on both sides of the fence when they're participating. That said, as I mentioned, we in our first year have already identified multiple different roles that apprentices can play within our business that are outside of the scope of our initial pathway and really are providing, ROI and value to our organization. That's one of the challenges, to Diane's point earlier, with the registered apprenticeship model, is that if we have too rigid and too baked of a system, it makes it hard for us to pivot and allocate our apprentices in directions where they can provide the most value to our organization, because we're hamstrung by some of the commitments to the registered model. So the modifications that she's proposing with some of the new registration systems is also something from an industry standpoint that is extremely appealing on this end, because we do need the flexibility. There's a job that was one of our pathway placements when we started this program that doesn't exist in our company anymore. So we have to be able to shift and pivot.
Thank you for that. Really important insight. And it's something that's important to see, sort of, for those out there thinking about what is the role of states and how do we scale these things. I don't think hearing across our speakers, whether it was Chris talk about how they leverage the existing CT pathways, or what you just heard about sort of having baked pathways, states doing their homework, understanding what industry sectors and what jobs are in demand, and then working to design pathways that apprenticeship programs can then build from, is a really important step that accelerates startup for employers, as Mark mentioned, but also is a very important element for apprentices themselves to ensure that the skills that they learn are not overly tailored to the needs of any single employer, and that they're valuable industry-wide. Diane, I want to come back to you and pick on your expertise, and please feel free to remark a little bit on anything else you've heard thus far, given your expertise in this space. But you came back to the survey that we mentioned at the beginning of this, and I'm glad you did, because you brought up actually another one of the questions we did ask, is what do you think of apprenticeship? As we saw, the support was strong. Then we asked, what do you think about apprenticeship for your child? The support does indeed soften. We also asked them, what's your overall awareness with apprenticeship? And there again, there is not a lot of awareness about apprenticeship in this country. Either way you slice it, the public does not have a good, keen understanding of what apprenticeship is. And then the other side of it is that they might associate it with that narrow set of jobs and sectors, and might not see it as a way to really advance their education over time. Given where you sat at the Department of Education in your previous role, talk a little bit about what you see as the important barriers, policy or cultural-wise, we need to be thinking about to ensure that apprenticeship is really recognized as a high-quality post-secondary education pathway, and that people can build on that experience and get more education over time as they need.
Yeah, so I think that, we have done a good job in our country over the last 2 decades, actually going back to the 80s, telling everybody that, college is the pathway forward. And from the federal perspective, we made sure that all of the data coming out of the federal government sort of positioned college as the leader. And certainly most of the financial incentives went to higher education and not work-based learning. And in fact, for too long, I think, in the federal government, workforce and work-based learning here at the Department of Labor was sort of seen as, maybe not a last resort, but, it was to get people back into the workforce that had been, pushed out of the workforce. Whereas I think at the Department of Education, where we talk about higher ed, we think about it in a very positive moving forward. So I think that, even in government, we've kind of had these two ways of looking at higher education versus workforce development that gave priority to higher education. So, we were successful in delivering that message. And by the way, in the 80s, there were demographic shifts, and colleges were worried about, where were they going to get their enrollment. And so, this played nicely into their goals for keeping their enrollments up. So, I think, we've proven that we can use the bully pulpit and put data out and help inform people's decisions. So I think we just have to make sure that we are putting unbiased data out so that people can make, decisions on their own. So, I think that we need to advance that message. What I have found, and again, maybe it's inappropriate to use my own experience as the example, but I will, So 9 years ago, when people heard that my son was doing an apprenticeship, their question was all about, well, what did you do wrong? What did he do wrong? What did his college do wrong? And my God, this is awful. But, fast forward, and, my social circle, who now have kids that are approaching that age, are calling me to say, how'd you get your kid into an apprenticeship? So, that's onesies and twosies, but I think as more young people and not so young people engage in apprenticeship, and people start meeting others who have been an apprentice, it's that sort of grassroots effort. The other thing is, I think for far too long, people have thought about apprenticeship only in the context of the building trades. And unfortunately, our society has taken a view of the building trades as if those are not professional positions. And I actually have a paper coming out soon. I mean, if you want to know what STEM positions look like, go look at how a diesel mechanic does their job. Go look at how a carpenter uses trigonometry. So, the real STEM jobs that are out there are oftentimes in these technical fields, which are highly STEMmy, and we just haven't communicated that message. And so I think we shouldn't sell the new apprenticeship as not the traditional building trades, because those are excellent jobs. And, my sister and her husband own a plumbing company. He did a plumbing apprenticeship, and I can tell you who has the 5-acre horse farm and the 50-foot yacht, and it is not me. So, I think we have, we've almost talked kids out of going into the building trades, and these are great jobs that, foster entrepreneurship and give people creative outlets. And so I don't want us to sell the new apprenticeship in a way that says it's better than the old apprenticeship. It's just that we want more options to be out there so that regardless of what you're interested in, there's a home for you. And I'll just say, and nobody knew this when they were forming the panel, but shout out to Chris. So my husband's cousin lives in Yakima, and her daughter's boyfriend completed the welding program that Chris talked about. And, a more articulate and mature kid I've never met. And, this kid knows where he's headed, and he's just doing phenomenally well. So nobody knew that there was that connection when they put us on a panel, but that connection is there. And so I've seen it, with my own 2 eyes. So congratulations, Chris. Your program's doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. So we're just about at time, but I want to make sure I get one very concrete lightning question for Chris right here, and Mark, chip in if this is relevant too. Liability and insurance, what does that mean when you're working with youth? We hear about this problem a lot. How do you handle that issue? How do employers manage that issue around insurance concerns and having minors in the workplace?
Well, we targeted, and this is Chris answering first. I'm sorry if Mark wanted to chime in first. We partner with the Washington State Department of Labor of Industries to have this very well mapped out. This is the reason, and again, like I said, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. We were already, when we met with AJAC, they came in and laid out their expectations, and one included OSHA 10 certification, and one included first aid CPR card. Well, we first aid CPR all of our students, and we also OSHA 10 certify all of our shop students. So we're like, oh, okay, well, we can do that because it's already done. And then this is also, and then we also, since we run the Boeing assembly program 540 hours, our students have already been trained on the equipment. And that doesn't just answer the safety question, but it also answers that return on investment question, because one of the big questions too is like, how does the business get their money back also by having this unskilled student? Our students, we don't send unskilled students to the businesses. They've already been trained from 7th grade through 11th grade before we place them in the 12th grade. One of our students was placed on Monday. He was fully independent, running an end mill and lathe by Wednesday. So these businesses are making money back. It's not charitable, but that's kind of an answer to that return on investment piece and the safety piece, and they're married.
Great. Any final words, 30 seconds to add to that, Mark?
No, I would say I think our process has been relatively similar. A lot of collaboration with the school district, also, oversight and support from CareerWise Colorado. Whenever you do have a 15 or 16-year-old on the work site, there are additional concerns and considerations. We have gone through various background check processes. For example, with our coaches, we have to be mindful of travel and mitigating. I have a mentoring background, so using some of the best practices in mentoring for some of those relationships. But to Chris's point, really collaborating with the school district, ensuring that all of our I's are dotted and T's crossed, and we go through non-disclosure agreements, things along those lines with the apprentices too, and really stress security, information security. They go through trainings, things of that nature as well. So we treat them as regular employees, ensure them as regular employees, but are very mindful of other considerations as well.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Chris. It's been a great discussion. Let me kick over to Lauren.
Thank you so much, Brent. That was an excellent discussion. Thank you, all of you, for taking some time to participate, and to all of our attendees who submitted really excellent questions. I learned a lot, and I'm really excited that we had this as our first webinar for the Western Governors Workforce Development Initiative webinar series. So thank you again to everybody. We will be sending a wrap-up email early next week, and that'll include a link to the recording of this webinar on YouTube and a summary of key discussion points brought up today. And I would like to turn your attention to our next webinar, which will be on March 8th, and we'll examine what actions states are taking to increase career readiness. So you can register for that through our website now, and I'll also be sending out a link to that in that follow-up email as well. So once again, thank you, Brent, thank you, Diane, Chris, and Mark, and to everyone who stuck with us for this hour and a half. We look forward to hearing from you all again at our next webinar. Have a great day.